You did it anyway.
Yes, and we are on the air.
All right. Well, welcome to everyone who has joined us so far. We're here for our third VirtualMania clinic. We're trying to do a series of topics that have to do with how we need to think about work in a different way during this crisis. And this week we're going to talk about virtual innovation. Some brainstorming, how do you come up with new ideas? How do you analyze things? How do you understand what's going on in your organization and make good innovative decisions? I think I'm passing it over to Kate.
Yes, so we're going to talk to you about a really helpful model for thinking about the different elements of innovation. And for each element, we will actually spend time showing you how it will feel in Teams, or should be using another platform. You'll see some similarities. What's critical here is think about innovation processes as collaboration. Each one of these elements that we're going to be describing, I think we're calling them dimensions, is an act of interaction, engagement, whether it's brainstorming, it's evaluating, it's sort of validating the usefulness of an idea, or it's validating the viability of a market. All of this is collaboration. And you're going to learn a little bit about both the process or the kind of ecosystem as well as the tools. Let's look to the next slide here. This is quickly the process that you will be using. Mark, do you want to run through this quickly?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we don't have a giant group, so it may just work for people to type what they want in the chat. We'll try to keep an eye on it. If there's something that you really, really want to ask, you can use that little emoticon, or not emoticon, that's an old word, emoji. If you're on a Windows machine, it's Win dot, and then you can pick icons and use them. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll try to like your message. If we like your message, then that means that we know you're there, and we're gonna try and follow up with you.
So this is all of us. It's the four of us, and obviously we take good pictures, but you also get to see us in live stream. So as each of us kind of goes through, we'll introduce ourselves so that you know who it is that you're speaking with.
Then what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the survey and the different techniques that you guys have already used. We went and asked you about pretty much everything that you're going to see displayed today. And what was kind of exciting was to see that a lot of you are already doing brainstorming, and you're using things like likes and sorting to figure out where you're going to be proceeding. Some of you are doing some moderated questions and answers. So you've got processes where you're drawing out ideas, and you've got scribes. You've got your scribes who are actively involved in doing voting and things like that. However, you're not probably getting some of the advantages we're going to be able to show today with respect to Teams. Things like working asynchronously, using polls, subscribing to threads and feeds and RSS feeds, and managing task lists effectively. We're going to show you a lot of that stuff. Let's look at the next slide. So this is what we're covering: what's innovation, resources, and then we're really going to get into action. We really want to help you propel forward. The following slide, let's go to that one, Chris. Keep going. These are the dimensions of innovation. Bridging will be very exciting. We'll be talking about brainstorming and talking about ways that we categorize. Social integration is saying, will this play in Peoria? Let's ask people who are what we call friendlies to help us determine whether or not this will be successful. Capability assessment is saying, are we able to kind of take that hill? Is this a particular idea that we can do with our ecosystem, our supply chain, our capabilities, our time available, and maybe even with the competition? Market exploration is saying, is this going to be viable in the market? What are some of the needs? Have we met those requirements? Commercialization, that's just basically putting it on the road. That's operationalizing the idea. And then the innovation ecology is what kind of sustains the entire thing. Even though we've called that number 6, it's going to be happening throughout. You're going to be hearing about process, culture, interventions that you as a leader of collaboration will undertake all the time. So this is a good opportunity for you to imagine your role. Over to you, Marianne.
So Kate had mentioned that we're going to go through the different attributes and really talk about them broadly in relation to how do you actually do this in a virtual context. But I also just want to kind of set the stage for what's going to happen. First of all, our goal right now is to focus on 2 business use cases, because those 2 business use cases will allow us to not only talk broadly about the process, but also allow us to do a technical demo. So what does this process look like if you happen to be doing this within the Microsoft Teams suite? Obviously, there's lots of tools to choose from, but since we have the benefit of having Chris with us, we're going to have Chris actually go through and do some demos. What I want to talk about first, before I turn it over to Chris for the demo, because I'm the person who's really kind of dealing with the human behind the process and the human behind the technology, is what's happening in the world today from a coronavirus context. And if you're thinking about ideation and you're thinking about idea generation and brainstorming today, appreciate that whether you're talking about building a product or you're talking about running a project, you are coming into an environment that the majority of the team is probably not used to doing this in a virtual context. You won't be getting together and putting your Post-it notes on a whiteboard in some sort of consolidated way. Or even if you've used a dispersed team model where you have some people outside the room, but some people in the room. Now everybody's in social isolation. Now you've got everybody in a technology platform, and in addition to that, you've got all sorts of different skill levels that you have to bring together. And so please don't underestimate, with all of the steps that we're going to talk to you about, don't underestimate the amount of pre-planning that has to happen. You have to make assumptions that people aren't familiar with this process. Even if they are familiar with the process, are they familiar with the technology, the platform, how to interact with other people on the platform? I mean, Mark and Chris and Kate and I have found this out through our clinics. You know, even though we've all done this process, we haven't necessarily worked together as a team, and we haven't necessarily worked together as a team on this particular platform. And so that's going to bring all sorts of new dynamics. If you don't take that into consideration, you're going to have major issues. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to kind of talk about the technology aspects. Once you've got the people planning done, what are some of the technical tools that you have to be able to get the process in motion?
Let me just add really quickly as we're moving over there. When you're doing this bridging step, there's 2 parts to it. One is getting the ideas out, and the other one is making sense of the ideas next to each other. You may have apples and oranges, and the critical success factor for you as a leader of this innovation process is to come up with categories so you can compare your apples to your oranges. And by the way, these categories are not just going to jump out at you. You may find that you need to go back to your idea generators and say, hang on, we need more information from you. So know that this is iterative.
Awesome. Thank you. So again, my name is Chris Bordlick. I'm one of the principal architects at the Microsoft Technology Center here in Boston, Mass. And typically spend a lot of time with my customers in person doing these sorts of ideation and brainstorming sessions. And one of the things that I miss being at home is not having a whiteboard with me. Typically a physical whiteboard or even a big meeting room device like a Surface Hub that Microsoft provides. One of the things that we can do, though, when we're working remotely is we can use things like the Microsoft Whiteboard app. So this is a free app that Microsoft makes available to Office 365 customers. There is a version of the app that is available in the Windows Store as a Windows Store app. There's a version that's available for folks like me that have an iPhone or an iPad. You can use the app on your iOS device. There's also a browser-based client. And one of the great things with this brainstorming and whiteboarding app is that you can use this to collaborate with other people in your organization. So the last few days I've been doing a remote hackathon and proof of concept with some of my colleagues, and we can invite other people in and actually enable them within our organization to collaborate with us on the whiteboard. When you're in the whiteboard app, certainly you can use a mouse and a keyboard. If you happen to have a device that supports touch or a pen as I do, I can actually go ahead and do some inking on the device just using my finger, or in this case, using a Surface Pen. But one of the nice things you see with this app is you do have the ability to do things like go ahead and pick from different templates that are available. So you'll see that I happen to pick the brainstorming template. And when I did this template, it builds out a nice structure that gives some of the rules around brainstorming, some of the things that Kate mentioned on the prior slide. We can have our agenda in there. We can capture any follow-ups. We can actually use these little sticky notes as a way to brainstorm and ideate on the different topics, and then actually do some sorting. So it might be challenging, again, in a virtual environment to let people do some brainstorming and ideation, and then actually do some sorting around the different ideas that folks are capturing. Now, this is just one of a number of different templates, so I'm not going to go through them all right now, but you'll see there are probably about 10 different templates that we've built into the Microsoft Whiteboard app that you can use for brainstorming and ideating. The Whiteboard app works, again, not only on these devices like a Surface Hub or a Windows device, it also is integrated into the Microsoft Teams app itself. So again, if you're working inside of the organization, the Whiteboard app is another application that you can share within the Teams meeting, like we're doing here. The last thing you can do with this app, before I kind of move on to the next part, is you can go ahead and when you're done, you can actually go ahead and share this information with other people. So one of the things that I often do with customers, even when we're in person, is that when we're done, I will export this out as an image. I'll then store the image as an artifact within the team. So if someone happened to miss the whiteboard session, they happen to miss the meeting, they get access to all the whiteboard notes. There's no need for someone to get a camera out, take a picture of things, and certainly in a digital environment, it's really important to have something like this that you can use to take your digital notes together and brainstorm together.
Now, as Chris kind of moves on to his next part of the demo, I also just want to emphasize, folks, that appreciate that depending on your context and who your audience is, we're giving you a really quick hit on these things. If you expect people to come to the table and actually go through the ideation process and be able to participate fully, then you're going to absolutely want to make sure that you're giving people a little bit of preliminary time to get familiar with this, and also give them some pre-work. So when they come into this context, they're going to be able to participate in a meaningful way. And then if you're working with international teams, appreciate that the preliminary prep is going to have to be adjusted so that you can account for people speaking multiple languages, multiple time zones, and cultural stuff. So build that into your process, and as you're accommodating these tools, really kind of think about how you're going to prep your people to get ready to use them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Marianne. And one of the ways that we've been working together, the four of us, is we've been leveraging Teams quite a bit. We all have very busy schedules, as I'm sure all of you do. And a lot of times we have to do the sort of prep and brainstorming kind of asynchronous, where we're actually doing it directly inside of Microsoft Teams. So this is an example of a demonstration team that we built out together just based on some of the scenarios we're walking through. One of the first things that you'll notice if you haven't used Teams before is in the upper right-hand corner here. Teams can be set up with different levels of privacy and security. So by default, when I created this team, only explicit people I invite into the team can join. I also could label that team with a confidentiality label, which we could use to drive security and access. And Teams, if you allow them to, can support bringing in guests. So a guest could be a business partner or a supplier, someone outside of your organization that you might want to bring in to collaborate with you. Teams, if you haven't used Teams beyond using Teams just for a meeting, is organized into different channels, as we call them. So if you see down here, I have 4 or 5 different channels that are created. One of them has that little lock next to it. This is what we call a private channel. And this gives us the ability to have a private space where only a select limited number of people can have a discussion. So maybe in this case here, maybe I'm working with a bunch of folks and maybe I have a question around funding and I need to post something, and I can go ahead and certainly vote things up and down and use these the likes or the hearts or the smiley face, etc. I can certainly use memes and gifs and emojis if I want to. And again, you as an organization can control whether or not people can use these or not. You notice that this particular message, I leverage the ability to send that with a higher level of priority. So I can do things around, giving some importance to it, certainly have a subject for the message to really anchor around that communication and that thread. The other thing that we did as we were doing the initial brainstorming is maybe I want to thank and congratulate someone. Maybe Ann Lee is a member of our team, and she did a really great job of facilitating the brainstorming and the ideation session that we did. I have the ability to go out here and just use this praise feature to actually go ahead and pick some sort of a sticker, if you would, and then go ahead and actually, again, share that with the team and use it as another way of just, again, thanking our colleagues, again, especially if others weren't part of that brainstorming session and some of their contributions to the team might not have been recognized by folks that weren't part of the meeting. So we're going to go through additional scenarios as we go through. But with that, I'm going to hand things back over to my colleagues to talk about the next scenario, which is around social integration.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. So we just talked a little bit about, okay, doing some kind of brainstorming. It could be taking place in the Microsoft whiteboard. It could also be taking place in that brainstorming channel that Chris just showed us, where we might have gone and added ideas and then maybe we clustered them into what might be viable investments. Here, once we have those ideas, once we've done some sorting, once we sort of shape them into a project plan or a product set of features, now what we're doing is we're using the crowd to kind of vote it up or vote it down or tell us what we like it. And the key thing here is to work with friendlies, work with people who are in your somewhat inner circle. They're going to be honest with you, but they're certainly not going to take your IP out the door, or they're not going to inadvertently kind of explain the secret project or product somewhere outside the boundaries you want them explored. The critical things here are that you have some kind of decision-making process. If you're going to work with those friendlies and they're going to do some voting, you got to figure out how is the decision going to be made? And there could be a couple of different decisions. So one might be the timeline. Another one might be the inclusion of features in your project or product. And one might be who's going to be in what roles. So each decision will have a decision owner and there'll be a decision process. I think I've explained in this group before, I used to work for Intel. Every single time we started a meeting, we'd say if we're going to have a decision, and we would have said how the decision would be made. Is it going to be a consensus? Is it a majority? Is it going to be a consultative? Or is it going to be basically an executive decision, which is one that's made in haste, usually because of an emergency or because of a pressing situation? Chris, back over to you.
All right, great. So in our second scenario, as Kate mentioned, we do have this idea of a brainstorming channel. So one of the things we've done is we've organized a specific channel for brainstorming and ideation. And one thing you might notice across the top of each of these channels, there's the ability to use what we call tabs. And there's a gallery of pre-built tabs or integration points that we have with Microsoft products as well as third-party applications. Again, your organization could choose to allow or block the usage of some of these. What I've done is gone ahead and build in some of the integration with other parts of the platform. So as an example here, you'll notice that, again, we're posting a little video here. We're asking people to share their ideas. We're asking to vote on the survey. One of the things that I did earlier is I posted a quick little poll directly inside of the chat where maybe I want to ask people to go ahead and very quickly do a lightweight poll where maybe we're trying to determine what should we work on next. Should we invest in flying cars? Should we invest in self-driving cars? And this is really good for a quick, informal, casual poll. Again, largely when you do this, a lot of times it's just pinned directly across the bottom of the channel here, across the window. So I just use the form and basically just created a very quick little poll. We also have the ability to do things where we might want a bit more structure. So again, leveraging Microsoft Forms in the built-in integration here with the tab, this is the form in the survey tool that we actually use to collect the feedback from you all. So that initial survey and poll we did with you was using Microsoft Forms, where in the case for you all, we used an anonymous poll where we actually sent this out to you all, and you can see 39 people had responded to it, and us as organizers could go in and actually view the responses and pick different themes and templates and what have you. You can use the same concept within the organization, where you can say, we want it to be authenticated, where we know who the person is. So maybe we know who they are, we know what their role is. We could restrict it, so maybe they can only vote once, or can they vote multiple times? We can make certain fields required. We can even do things where maybe we want to apply some sort of weighting or grading, where maybe it's something where we're doing a quiz to see if people actually watch the last meeting, and maybe did they learn the lessons they wanted to as part of a meeting or a video. We want to do some lightweight quizzing as well. But I can go ahead and collect some feedback here to say, I think we did really well in our last phase. I think we want to work on some quality fixes, and we need to keep talking with our customers, which again gives me the ability to very quickly collect information from others on our team. Another option we can do is we can build our own custom applications. So Microsoft has something we call the Power Platform, which allows us to build these custom solutions which can integrate with certainly Microsoft applications like Microsoft Teams and Microsoft SharePoint. They can actually integrate with third-party applications. I'm actually in the middle of a 2-week proof of concept and hackathon with a large financial services customer who has third-party applications like Salesforce. And they want to build a very quick application that they can then integrate Salesforce data and bring it in to applications like Microsoft Teams to actually improve the process and fill some of the gaps that the sales teams have today, where they're doing a lot of ideation and brainstorming around customer opportunities, and they're doing it via email and spreadsheets, and they want a much more structured way of doing it. So the nice thing with these applications is we get a lot of custom features like the ability to filter and the ability to go in and allow people to submit new ideas. And certainly part of the submitting of the ideas could be voting on different ideas and topics that are submitted by other people. The last key concept before I hand it over to my colleagues again is really around this ability to tag. One of the new things inside of Microsoft Teams is the ability to create tags inside of a team. And then you can use that tag to actually notify people. So the idea here is that maybe you have a lot of different people that are participating as part of the team, and they have different areas of interest, different topics, maybe they're subject matter experts. Either the organizer of the team or the members, if you choose to, could actually go ahead and tag themselves to say, I want to be notified about certain topics. I want to be identified as an expert within this team around certain things. And again, in this case, I went ahead and was able to mention by just doing the @ sign within Teams. So I can certainly go ahead and @mention the entire team. So I could @mention everyone that's in the innovation team. I could just mention the specific channel as an example, but I can actually go ahead and just mention a specific tag, and this enables me to then notify people that are following a tag. We see this happen a lot inside of healthcare settings, where maybe there are certain people that are on-call doctors or on-call nurses, people that are subject matter experts in certain areas, and they want to designate themselves as that. So when someone mentions that tag, they're the ones that get the notification. And again, that's another way of bringing in and brainstorming and ideating with a larger group of folks across the team.
Hey, Chris, one other thing that you and I have talked about before, which you could actually instantiate in the model you just showed, is what we call prediction markets. So in addition to going and saying, hey, we got a bunch of ideas, let's vote them up or vote them down or prioritize them, let's also use some things where we're talking about what might be the future. And we're going to talk a little bit about capabilities in markets in the next 2 phases. And one of the things we can do is we can use the same feature to say, what do we think is the probability that, there will be a growth in this manner, or that the competition will do this thing. If we have a large enough population, there's a very high likelihood that those will be accurate. And there's a lot of really interesting research on that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
All right.
I'm going to talk a little bit about that capabilities assessment that Kate just mentioned. My name's Mark Anderson. I work in a small company, Synpraxis Consulting. There are 6 of us, so we know who can do what. We might have a little bit of a conversation about it, but it's pretty straightforward. Whenever we've done all that brainstorming, we've figured out what we want to do. Well, we have to figure out who in the organization can work on this stuff. Who knows what? Who is going to bring something to the table so that we can take all of those great ideas and turn them into something tangible and useful and productive and make money with them and all the good things that happen coming out of the other end. So this is a challenge that's been around since, the early knowledge management days in the mid 90s. We always wanted an expertise locator. We always want to know, well, how can we figure out who in the organization may be able to contribute to this? There's some great tools that we can use from a technology perspective, but of course they only work if you put the work into them. You have to make sure that you have collected the data from people, or as people are hired, you've had an onboarding process that brings their information into some sort of repository within your organization. There are also public sources, and Chris will show us a little bit about how a platform like LinkedIn can be useful, even though you're trying to find out things that are inside your organization. That sort of border, that barrier between the inside of the organization and the outside of the organization has really become a lot more open and fluid than it used to be. We only used to know stuff inside, and now we can also turn outside to look out for capabilities that we might have that we don't know about. So Chris, I know you've got some great stuff to show here. Why don't you take it back?
Sounds great. Thanks, Mark. So yeah, as I mentioned, I work for Microsoft, so a little bit larger company than some practices right now. So one of the challenges we deal with is certainly, again, brainstorming and ideating and finding information and subject matter experts across the organization. Certainly as we onboard new employees, as people change roles, which happens from time to time within Microsoft. And one of the things that we announced at Microsoft Ignite back in the fall that's coming soon is something that Mark and I have been involved with quite a bit, is something called Project Cortex, where we're actually working on leveraging machine learning and machine teaching, which allows us to infer things like topics and expertise to start to decorate a person's profile. So no longer do you have to worry about potentially going in and tagging yourself as saying, I'm an expert in innovation, or I'm an expert in a certain topic. As Mark mentioned, Microsoft leverages LinkedIn. We actually acquired LinkedIn around a year or two ago, and LinkedIn is a really great tool for people to identify their subject matter expertise, their interests, their skills, their connections outside the organization. So you're going to see more and more of us blending together the Microsoft graph, which is inside the organization, with the LinkedIn social graph outside of the organization. But another good source of brainstorming information within an organization might be tools like Microsoft Yammer. So in a company like Microsoft, we leverage Microsoft Teams quite heavily for planning and project work. But with 120,000 people globally, we leverage Microsoft Yammer for developing communities of practice and communities of interest, for enabling people to do things like ask a question and mark something as an answer, and mark of the answers whether the question's been answered or not, and which of the answers is the best response. So we do have the ability to bridge people working and collaborating in a small group or a smaller group inside of Microsoft Teams with the broader organization doing innovation and ideation. So in this case, we might have an innovation community inside of Yammer, and you notice it's external, meaning there are guest members invited from outside the organization that might be sharing their ideas on the topics. Yammer also supports the ability to tag certain topics with a hashtag. So in this case, I can pivot from looking at just a community focused around innovation to identify any topic across the organization that might be tagged with hashtag innovation. So it gives me the ability, again, to very easily monitor things within here. And again, I, as an individual, can certainly contribute to the broader discussion across the organization. Or as you saw back on this innovation community, I could go ahead and maybe share this post from Yammer back into the private team. Because maybe what you might want to do is maybe talk about this within the smaller group in a private space where we want to brainstorm what our response might be related to a particular topic. I often talk about this as an example with HR, and maybe we're monitoring things like sentiment analysis and people that are talking about things in our CEO connection, which we talked about last time, and maybe there's certain positive or negative trends that are happening in the organization, and maybe we want to stay on top of the pulse of what our employees are talking about, not just for innovation, but more broadly, especially during a time of change like this, where a lot of employees are asking and answering questions, and we want to keep a pulse on what's the sentiment of those posts. But another big thing that we can do, especially as we're a new employee that's onboarding to the organization, is how do we find and identify other conversations, other people that's out there? Teams supports this ability to leverage what we call chatbots. You'll see here that I have a chatbot from a company called Ask HR. I'm actually on their board of directors, where they've actually built a domain-specific chatbot for answering common questions around HR, things like benefits, vacation time, how do we request time off, What's our sick leave look like? What's our leave of absence benefits that we might have if we happen to have the coronavirus, have to deal with a family member that might have the coronavirus. But there's actually a bot built into the platform called the Who bot. So as I start to type here, you'll see that it gives me common questions that I can ask this chatbot. So first thing is, maybe as an employee, I can say, who is, Brian Groth, who might be an employee that I might not know who Brian is. And the chatbot goes out and it can find who it is. It can tell me, who does Brian work with. It can also show me, where does Brian sit in the organization, so I can pivot the organizational hierarchy, and I can see activity that we have in common. If I go back to the chatbot, I can also go in and say, who knows about maybe a topic like innovation. So now I can go in and start to ask the chatbot questions as I'm trying to find other people. And in our organization, I happen to be one person that's been flagged as someone that knows a little bit about innovation, and I happen to have authored around 68 different posts in the organization that are focused around things like innovation, and I could be mentioned by other people within the company. So this is a great way of, again, discovering people and topics in conversations. The last thing that I wanted to show before we go back into our next scenario is how we're starting to enable things like Microsoft Search to enable you to eventually use the same search box across all of Microsoft 365, whether you're in Teams or Yammer or SharePoint or even the Office applications. So if I go in here and I start to search in Microsoft Search, which is powered by Microsoft Bing, it can certainly search outside of the organization and find me content outside of my company. But notice this little banner, it's saying, I want to show you the results just for your company. And when I say show me these results, it's identifying, well, there's a group within our company called Innovation Alley, and these are the members that are in that group. These are all the files in our organization that have innovation as part of it. But here are all the different conversations that are happening about innovation inside of Yammer. Here are all the different conversations that might be happening about innovation inside of Microsoft Teams. So again, I as an employee will no longer have to just think about, where do I go to search to find something? Is it a person I'm looking for? Is it a piece of content? Was it a conversation? Was it a file? Was it inside the company, outside the company? Again, we're really innovating around this concept around Microsoft Search, and then enabling partners to build connectors to allow you to bring in external data sources, external applications, to again enable you to bridge your internal search, your internal discovery of people and subject matter experts with external content as well, with content sources such as LinkedIn being another source of content for you. So I'll pause and again see if my colleagues want to add anything else, or if there's any questions on anything that we've shared today.
Yeah, I was going to say, Chris, that's really cool. I mean, it's as we often get from people we work with as clients. They say, can you make it as simple as, sometimes they say, another search engine or Bing,
Sure.
And this brings that same experience to that same search page that you're used to, and brings in content from inside your organization into that same context, which is really exciting. That WhoBot is something that we all designed in 1996, but we never knew how to build. So we're seeing stuff that we've wanted for decades showing up in these platforms that really makes finding the people in an organization who can make something happen really easy, much easier. We can't go forward with these great ideas if we don't have the people to act on them. So,
actually, sorry, Chris, I just wanted to add, put it into the context of what's happening today. I think that in the coronavirus environment where people are feeling so isolated, but they're still trying to get work done, within an organization, there was a traditional sense that you had to physically go meet someone or somehow connect with them in some sort of a physical way in order to be able to get a relationship going. And I think that one of the advantages of our LinkedIn culture, where you have second and third connections, is people are becoming much more savvy about looking for ways to find that talent, and then people are much more receptive to being contacted in non-traditional ways, so that electronic contact. But this just extends all the things that we've been doing as somebody who's also a small business owner like Mark. Different ways that we can leverage these relationships in ways to expand our capabilities, but also access subject matter experts in a much more targeted and strategic and efficient way.
Absolutely. Yeah, and before I go back to the next scenario, this search bar that you're seeing at the top here, again, eventually we'll all be replaced with Microsoft Search. So you won't have to go out to Bing. Again, it's just gonna be the same search box, whether you're in Teams in the browser, in SharePoint, in Word, Excel, Outlook, it's all being powered by the same search engine, which, Mark, is something you and I have been talking about for at least the 20 or so years that I've known you.
Right.
Going back to our days when I was your customer.
Having to know where to go to search for something means that you're not searching, right? It means you have to get there first. And that Microsoft search bar is bringing everything into one place, which is awesome.
Cool.
Thank you, Chris. That was so awesome. And I'm sure you guys all, you were starting to salivate when you were hearing that he was being able to pull in outside information about maybe outside talent or outside resources. And when we talked about capability assessment, we're really basically saying, all right, so if we're doing product innovation or we're doing project innovation, how are we going to get it done? And open innovation, the hallmark of open innovation is bringing ideas from the outside in and bringing talent from the outside in. But it's only as good as the market you're able to go after, right? If the market's not there, if there is competition that's already serving most of the needs of the market, you got to find your niche. And so what Chris started to talk about, which was the Bing search combined with the internal search, is going to be your asset as you're trying to sort out its viability, the market's viability. So you can see here, the critical thing to make this efficient is to work with the team around the features that you have agreed to, at least tentatively, based on your capabilities and based on your having used the crowd to socialize the ideas. Now you've got some dimensions, and what you're going to do is you're going to troll the market on a regular basis. And this does not mean taking everybody 24/7 and having them search. You're going to be able to do some sustained searches. So back to you, Chris.
All right.
Hardest working man in Demoville.
Not just a pretty face. At least that's what my wife tells me. So, so going back into Teams, and I was taking a quick peek at the chat and some of the questions that are out there. And certainly one of the things that, as we build artificial intelligence into the platform, we want to make sure that there's not conscious or unconscious biases built in. So the reason why we're trying to combine machine learning and machine teaching. So machine learning is certainly having the algorithms going out and using what we think is a broad and representative set of data, and certainly doing things with positive and negative reinforcement testing. Machine teaching enables a human to actually go in and say, these are the positive cases or the negative cases to help train the model over time. So we definitely want to make sure that our artificial intelligence is reasonable ethical AI, where we're not building biases into the AI platform, and it's not just reinforcing existing biases that might already exist.
And
the other thing,
sorry, just one other thing, because Dirk asked a question. You know, when you go to search, you don't always see the search. You know, when you put your cursor in that search box, you see different things based on what you've been doing recently. So that search box, and it's sort of like the search box is learning based on your activity. So you don't always see the same results based on what you're typing up there. You see results that are in context of what you have done recently or you've worked with recently. That Microsoft graph that sits underneath everything is watching all of those signals, and that's what some of those search suggestions are coming from.
Absolutely,
so it works with you and your interests. Sorry to interrupt.
No, all good. So another topic that I saw too is around just things around just topics. So certainly one of the things that I think I showed you in the last call, the last clinic we did, was around doing live captions, the ability to do speech to text. We do also support natively in Teams and Yammer the ability to do language translation. So if somebody posts something in one language and you happen to not speak that language, so I only speak English, but if someone were to post something in Japanese or Chinese or French or Spanish, what have you, they could respond in their native language. I could let the machine translate it back to English. I could respond in English, and they could, again, read it in their local language as well. We've also built into Microsoft Search the ability to do things around acronyms. So Microsoft, one of the big tools that we've been using for years is the Microsoft Glossary, because Microsoft has a lot of 2 or 3 or 4 letter acronyms that are there, and a lot of times they're overloaded, meaning the same acronym can mean many different things in a similar construct, in a similar kind of concept. So we want to make sure that context, rather, is what I was looking for. We want to make sure that people understand in the context of what I'm using the acronym, what's the most appropriate usage of that. So as we bridge out around the market exploration, we certainly talked about how we could bring information in. One of the things that Teams supports is the ability to leverage what we call connectors. So there is a connector framework that exists, and you can use Microsoft's out-of-the-box pre-built connectors. You could build, if you're a developer, your own custom connector, or if you're a Microsoft partner or a third party, you could build a connector as well. So what we've done here is we've actually leveraged a connector that in this case is leveraging Bing News, which is again one of Microsoft's search engines, and we can go ahead and we can define how often do we want the search engine to do a search? What are the topics that it wants to look for? So earlier I configured it to look for things around innovation, and it gives me a pre-built list of different topics related to the innovation domain that I can certainly go ahead and leverage and pick disruptive innovation as an example, and then pick how often do I want to have these posts scheduled to bring information to the team. But another thing that I did is I actually leveraged Microsoft Power Automate, formerly known as Microsoft Flow. That is the same tool that I was using earlier when I showed you the HR collaboration. It was actually monitoring Yammer, and whenever someone posts something to an internal Yammer community, it's running through Power Automate. It's doing some speech to text, or not speech to text, it's doing language translation if it needs to. It's doing sentiment analysis to look at is it a positive or negative post, and then based on that, it's then posting it over to Teams. Well, I leveraged a similar sort of connector or template for Twitter. So I built a Power Automate workflow that's out there that's monitoring certain things that whenever is happening on Twitter. So whenever someone posts something with hashtag innovation in it, it's posting to the innovation team in the innovation news, and it's giving it a particular title around a new tweet, and it's bringing in whatever fields I want to bring in from the tweet. So I just happen to be grabbing the text. I could grab other things related to it. What it's doing now is whenever someone posts a tweet out there with the word innovation in it or hashtag innovation, it's actually bringing that information into the team, and then other people can go ahead and look at, and I can say, hey, everyone that's looking at innovation as an example, check this out. And now we can start to have a broader conversation with all the people that have me following the innovation tag or have me following that particular channel. So it's just one of the ways that you can leverage market exploration in terms of search and connectors and workflow to actually monitor different data sources inside the organization as well as outside the organization.
And Chris, just a quick follow-up to you. I noticed that your name was associated with it because you set it up, but you might choose to delegate it. So you might say, at Marianne, can you consolidate this, or can you move it to a kind of coherent idea? Because we've got 7 different articles that we're now consuming about this particular customer. Let's go and tell one story.
Absolutely, yeah, and you're right, because I connected the flow to look at use my Twitter account and to post as me to Teams. All of these posts that are coming in are coming through as me, but whether I at mention a tag or at mention a specific person, like Anna Lee, I can go ahead and certainly tag another person, and then Anna Lee, if you look at her feed, she just got a notification from me saying that someone had posted it, and then she can go ahead and say, thumbs up, I've got it, which then going back to me kind of gives me that little gesture that I know that Ann is on it and she's working on it as well.
This, and if you think about it, this replaces that, I'm going to walk down to Annalee's desk because I can't do that right now, right? So Annalee might be making herself a sandwich, or she might be, having to take care of her kids for right now. We still can have that conversation. It's just asynchronous. We do that in email. We do that in, in other ways. But, during this crisis, we've had to adjust everything to this. But it still works. You just have to think about things as a little bit different from an immediacy perspective.
Absolutely. All right.
So when we're talking about commercialization, obviously everything we've talked about to this point, you've pulled a team together, you've managed to lay out a framework for work, you've utilized these tools really well, but you've tutored your folks, coached your folks, gotten them to the point where they're doing a great job. They're at the moment where now a product is ready to launch, a project is ready to operationalize. now at the point where all bets are off, because no one's waiting for you to launch this new product. Nobody is waiting for you to implement this project necessarily. And not only that, we've gotten away from what Kate was talking about before when we were talking about social integration. And instead of having a friendly audience that's probably involved with this process as part of the actual development of the product or the project, now you have to turn around and adopt some of the change management aspects that are associated with making something live and breathe, taking it from concept and introducing it into the world. So one of the things we absolutely wanted to highlight here, first of all, is that all of the tools that Chris has showed you up to this point have to be leveraged at this particular stage, because whether we're talking about being able to identify appropriate resources or potential advocates or subject matter expertise to help with a new phase of this particular ecosystem, this innovation ecology, whether we're talking about some of the just brainstorming topics, whether we're talking about being able to create hashtags or different types of targets that will allow us to be able to communicate things broadly out to the next set of individuals that are going to be impacted by our piece of work. Appreciate that operationalizing and launching now broadens things out and requires you to look at things from lots of different angles and really kind of think about how are you going to change the ownership from something that was within a team that's been in a development process to taking it and launching it into a broader audience that is going to actually be the group of individuals that are going to be asked to either consume that product or adopt that product, or to operationalize and adopt the project output. And so this is where your projects are really kind of transitioning. Put it into the context of the COVID situation, the coronavirus situation. Appreciate that it's hard enough to do this when you can actually have in-person meetings or in-person events or in-person dynamics. Now put it into the context of how do you do this when you have to do everything virtually. And now you have to capture people's attention. You have to be able to identify the right resources and do this in a completely virtual environment. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk a little bit about some of the things that he's done and also how he's using some additional tools for this purpose.
Awesome, thanks. So yeah, going back one more time to Teams. We do have a product launch channel that we might have organized, and one of the things that we can leverage quite heavily is Microsoft Planner. And Microsoft Planner is integrated with Teams as well for a very lightweight, agile Kanban type board. I mentioned earlier, I'm in the middle of a 2-week remote hackathon with a large financial services customer. Normally we'd be together in a physical conference room at the technology center. We can't, obviously, because of what's going on. So what we're doing is we're actually leveraging Planner, much like we're doing here, and we have our daily stand-up in the morning, and then we have an open bridge that we're staying on, and we're leveraging Teams and channels to collaborate and share sample code and questions that we have and resources. But a great thing with this is we can organize these tasks into different, we call them buckets. So maybe there's a design phase, a build phase, and a test phase. And then maybe I want to pivot it to look at the resource allocation. So as part of the stand-up, we might go down the tasks that are assigned to each person and ask any progress they might have had in the past day, any blockers or issues they might have. And then I certainly can go ahead and just look at tasks based on what's upcoming by due date or by progress as well. So give me some great visibility into everything that's going on within the project. Another thing we might need to do, though, is we might need to bring in analytics and reports. So maybe there's a dashboard, as Kate had mentioned, where maybe we're bringing in information that's related to defects or our supplier quality or other things that might be going on out in the organization. So certainly you can leverage a dashboard tool like Power BI and have this embedded directly in the team so people can get updated information around all of our suppliers, any trends that are going on, and potentially have a conversation where maybe they can ask another person to say, you know what, Magnus, why are we seeing so many defects? And then that person, again, doesn't have to ask, what report are you talking about? Where are you? They send an email and someone else doesn't see it. Or again, if we're in the office, maybe they would have walked down the hall and talked to the person. Again, we get to have that threaded conversation. And again, I have the ability to have it all in context of the object, whether it happens to be a report or a document or something else.
And I think that this is
you didn't put a cover sheet on that TPS report there, Chris.
Exactly.
And what I was going to also just kind of jump in and say, folks, is that from a change management perspective, appreciate the power of being able to meet objections or to anticipate those objections by looking at features like this in order to be able to create those strong visuals that will help folks that might be kind of struggling with whatever it is that you are trying to introduce, and then really kind of putting this in the context of, remember, you're not going to be able to do face-to-face interactions, and so how are you going to position this stuff so that you can use it in more of an anticipatory perspective as opposed to waiting for someone to complain about something? How do you actually use it to get ahead of stuff so that you can present it early on so that people are going to be a little more receptive to it?
Yeah, we do a lot of predictive analytics. So again, using artificial intelligence, machine learning to look at trends in predictive analytics. And from a COVID perspective, I've been involved with a project that Microsoft is doing with folks out in the Seattle area to actually look at utilization around PPEs and other equipment, facilities, resources, and do some predictive analytics to say, well, based on the rate of the spread and based on the rate of the usage of some of the different equipment, this is when a certain hospital might run out of certain equipment. And if there's another hospital that has more capacity, how do we reallocate some of the capacity in terms of beds or people or PPEs or other things to get visibility around that as well. The last thing from the product scenario is maybe we then had a recording. So we talked last clinic around using Microsoft Teams to run small events like this or large events like Microsoft's CEO Connection. Again, we're supporting 10,000 and up to 100,000 people in a large broadcast event. Well, that recording is leveraged inside of Microsoft Teams and could be pinned as a tab or as a channel where people can watch the recording around the product launch, a sales meeting, any training. If someone missed the last stand-up meeting and the meeting was recorded, they could have access to all of the recording, again, directly inside of the same environment. And then I'll close out with one last scenario before I'm sensitive to time. I want to make sure we have time for a wrap up and questions. We did talk a bit about, again, collaborative authoring, and, we do have the ability certainly to continue to brainstorm and take notes inside of Microsoft OneNote. So I saw some notes around, maybe leveraging certainly what we have available inside of the Whiteboard app or inside of, things like PowerPoint. But there's also the ability to leverage Microsoft OneNote, as we've been doing, to take our notes and do our brainstorming. And one of the beautiful things with these notes is, again, they can be edited in the web browser. They can be edited on the thick client or the mobile client. And there's also the ability to go in and actually tag things as to-dos or follow-ups or ideas, which, again, as we're brainstorming and trying to prioritize and keep on top of things, is a useful resource. And then the last thing is really around that collaborative authoring we talked about. Again, this presentation we prepared today and the ones we've done over the last month has all been done directly inside of Microsoft Teams, leveraging certainly OneNote for the note taking and PowerPoint for working on our slides together. Same thing applies to other things like Excel, and in this case, Microsoft Word, where, again, I can go in and actually view a document and I can see the document and I can see here's a threaded conversation where Anne reviewed the document. She went in and she added some comments, and I can see directly in the context of the document some of the comments that are in there, and I can certainly resolve it. I can give a reply to it. And again, actually bringing all of those very specific narrow comments that might be attached to a slide or a particular paragraph, but then also having the ability to have a broader discussion at the macro level around the presentation, around the document, et cetera, where we can bring together the commenting to kind of close that loop around the overall planning for the project or continue working on the brainstorming. So with that, I think we've got 5 minutes left. I'll hand it back to, I think Kate might be doing the wrap up here. Or
I
Mark?
think it's me.
I think it's Mark.
Yep, I see
So-
Mark is.
So,
Go ahead.
so as Chris pointed out, we can do collaboration real time. I mean, I'm sitting here with the PowerPoint open on my desktop, and I'm screwing it up for Chris. But we can work on this thing collaboratively, and like Clive mentioned, you can even use PowerPoint as a sort of a, it's not a poor man's whiteboard. It actually works sort of like a whiteboard. So I think what tool you use always ought to be focused on what you want the result to be, right? So we use OneNote when we want to create an outline for something, but then we might end up turning that into a PowerPoint deck that we work together on collaboratively. So lots of different ways we can think about bringing these tools together, and it really depends on what your outcome is going to be. So we talked through the sort of cycle of how do you come up with the ideas for what you're going to do, all the way through to how we commercialize them and what sort of tools that exist in the ecosystem that you could bring to bear. I think there are a lot of different options here, and what we wanted to do is open it up for a discussion. If anyone has any questions or any ideas that you think we missed or you want us to expand on, please feel free to come off mute and ask your questions or make any comments.
Yeah, and as people are thinking about their questions, don't forget, in this particular circumstance, you've got lots of people coming into these environments that this is a new way of working for them. And so having tolerance for the fact that you're going to be probably doing a lot more coaching or just tolerance for the fact that folks are going to come in and they're going to make missteps, and how do you keep them together, but how do you also allow them, essentially allow them to be able to get dispensation right off the bat, so that there's just less stress about getting involved with a project like this if this is something new to them.
Amen to that. I want to just also agree, your transparency, your kind of marching through the process and saying, this is where we get the dimensions and we agree to them. This is the way that we're co-authoring. This is my role as the owner of the document. This is what it means by pens down. Here's where we comment. Here's where we edit in line. All of that clarity might have been so easy for you to do in the physical space. You just kind of set it at someone's desk. When you don't have that much interaction, or when your only interaction is part of a virtual environment, you will be saying a lot more things explicitly. And it may feel a little kind of weird, but know that you're doing it out of care, not out of being a micromanager.
Yeah, these are definitely moderated forums, without a doubt, Kate. Barbara Phillip is asking, what's the best way to manage breakout groups in a live meeting within Teams if you have external participants?
Yes, so certainly go ahead, Mark.
Sorry, I mean, we did talk about that a little bit last week when we were talking about how do you manage events, because a meeting is an event. It's just a small event. And if we decided that, during this is a Teams meeting, if we decided that we wanted to, 2 or 3 people go off and think about something, we could just invite them all to a separate meeting right here. That would be one option. They could go into another channel and have a little chat while we're all talking. Believe me, those of us who do webinars often are doing that lots of times in the background to try to back channel the conversation, and that's not a bad thing. So there are a lot of different ways to sort of split off different groups of people while something is going on. I think it depends on whether you want them to stay in the meeting and pay attention to that and then do something on the side, or if it's time, okay, you two go and work on that and come back and report to us, then that would probably be splitting off a separate meeting.
Yep, and Mark, I was just bringing up for reference what we kind of walked through in our last clinic, and that recording's out there if folks want to review that as well.
Right, that recording and the one from our first session are all available, and the link is at the bottom of those slides. So I think it's my turn to wrap things up. We have had every intention of trying to do Teams Thursday on June 3rd. We originally had it scheduled for April 2nd, I believe. It was a Thursday. June 3rd is a Wednesday, I believe. We're feeling that we probably won't be able to pull it off in that time frame. So stay tuned though for the to the Teams Thursday, that channel. We'll probably have some other things coming up. Things are we're generally going virtual, and we may have some more webinars in this series. These were the 3 that we had planned out so far, but now that we've gotten to the time period that we're in, we may have some other ideas coming up. And if any of you have any ideas about things that you would like to see us talk about, whether you're here live or you're watching this recording, please use the links on this page, or send an email to info@teamsthursdayne.org, and we will certainly take that into account. But thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. Hopefully we've covered some topics and some tools that you have maybe not seen in the same context before, even if you were familiar with some of the bits and pieces.
Thank you.
And I think that's that.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Please be safe. Take care.